We started working, SkyBounce, the company that's behind The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead and the upcoming Outcast for Cinemax. And, we're always interested in cross-media, storytelling. Narrative is really the thing that drives us as a company. And we started seeing some VR opportunities in that a lot of people were making experiences in VR, but they weren't necessarily delivering narrative. So we thought there was a great opportunity to create a narrative series like a TV series, but done entirely in VR. One of the great challenges of VR is trying to figure out how do you tell a story in 360 degrees, right? So normally when we tell television, we're used to saying, okay, you're looking here. Oh, this is an important clue, so you need to look here. Making sure that someone's actually looking in the right direction is difficult. The first week that we shot on Gone, we were in the Sequoia National Forest, and it's beautiful, right? So the first thing that happens when you put on that headset and you're in the sequoias, everyone just does this. Like they're just like, wow. Because you're looking around and you're seeing these, 300-foot trees that are hundreds of years old, and you just want to take it all in. And we're like, okay, we can try to fight that, but why not? Like, why not just embrace it, right? Like, embrace the fact that people are going to be looking around and design your story a little bit differently so that we can use audio cues to trick you, to make you, three-dimensional audio. You hear a snap over here, you look that direction. But also, we make it so that we're engaging. The story continues whether or not you're looking in the right place. So it both encourages repeat viewing, but also trains the user to be looking for where the story should start, right? So we drop you into an experience where you're focused one way. If you choose to look in a different direction, that's kind of on you, and then you have to sort of pick up cues as to like where you actually should go. I think what you're asking is, when you've seen those experiments of, putting someone on the edge of a cliff or putting somebody up on the I-beam in a construction site and seeing how they react. That to me, that's a fantastic experiential moment, right? And those moments, yeah, you don't need to tell someone when you're on the ledge of a cliff overlooking a 500-foot drop that, oh, are you going to step off or not step off, right? Because that's an experiential moment. That's not narrative, right? That's one dot. That's like, that's a letter or a word. That's not a story. So for us, we have to string together hundreds of those, thousands of those to make a compelling narrative. And so to tell that narrative, you say, okay, well, people are going to wander, right? When you watch an episode of TV or you watch an episode or you watch a game of sports, like you're paying really close attention for a long period of time. But then at other points, you cut out, right? Like you get distracted, your phone rings, you have to go to the bathroom, whatever. Something happens that takes your attention away. How do you then sort of come back in and know where to pick up? Network TV is famous for that, right? They repeat things after the commercial break, right? They're like, oh, well, now that we found this body, right? Like, and you're sort of, now we found this body of this person that's really important, and et cetera, et cetera. They lead you there. And in VR, you don't have to lead them episode to episode, but you do have to sort of say, okay, if you're looking up in the sky, how can I make that a useful narrative for you and not just an experiential moment that's a lot of fun? Well, I think consumption habits right now, we have such a low and narrow install base for people that have experienced VR. We have the early adopters and people that are into tech, but we don't necessarily have a broad-based, long-term history of people that are used to watching VR the way, people know how they like to watch TV. So the initial instinct, I think, is everybody wants to make bite-sized content to make it not too daunting. Someone says, like, okay, put on these goggles and this headset and you're going to be in there for 4 hours. I'd be like, no way. But if people say, okay, let's make something that's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, everyone's like, okay, I'm willing to sort of try that. But what we find is we've programmed for 5 to 10 minute experiences. What we find is that once people do it, they actually want to see 90 to 120 minutes like in a row. So once you get past the initial hurdle strapping into the headset, like you're there. And so I think as technology increases and improves, we're going to see, the episode times will go up, the experiential times will go up, and also people just be more accustomed to the fact, oh yeah, this is going to be a thing that I do. And some of the next gen technologies of VR, I think will be more room-based and less sort of headset based, or more sort of, the headsets themselves will be lighter and more portable and less sort of daunting to put on. And I think as that happens, again, you'll also see episode times increase. Yeah, I mean, because look, when you're watching on certain technologies, it's basically a phone strapped, inches from your eyeball. So having that can be fatiguing, right? It's not what's designed for, even though the goggles sort of adjust for that. But some of the newer headsets and some of the newer experiences are a little bit more, or a little less punishing in that regard. But yeah, I've had no problem being in VR for an hour, 2 hour at a time, and I definitely come out not because the experience was bad, but more because it was like, oh, I have something else to do. I think that there's no doubt in my mind that VR is not only a medium, but it's here to stay, right? This is, I feel like for the last 15 years, people are like, oh, VR's coming, VR's coming. But the moment is now. It came upon us really quickly. It was like sort of the 15-year overnight success story, I feel like. But where we're at is amazing. It's an amazing opportunity where you can actually tell live action experiences in VR that are just absolutely out of this world. And I think that as soon as we have a proven monetization model, whatever it ends up being, and I think there'll be a lot of experimentation with it, but as soon as we get that proven monetization model, I think we'll be in a great shape. And I guess the evolution of VR into medium is happening. Like it's happening. It's going to happen. Your kids, my kids, they will live in a world where VR is like one of the primary ways they consume content. I feel that 3D was a cherry on top, right? You weren't going to the experience for 3D. You went to it because you liked the Sunday, which was the movie, right? You either liked the movie or you didn't like the movie. The 3D thing was something like, oh, that was neat. But I feel like at the end of the experience, all came back down to, was it a good movie or not a good movie? There's nobody who was like, oh, that movie was bad, but the 3D was amazing, so I'm going to go watch it again. Whereas I actually think that VR opens up entirely new types of storytelling devices, narrative structures. I think one of the reasons why you've seen so much travelogue and documentary footage occur is because, when we did our first shoot in the Sequoias, we sent our camera tests in to our partners at Samsung. And it's the first time ever in my history of producing stuff that I got a call from our network, from Samsung, saying, oh my God, this is amazing. We're like, we didn't send you anything. They're like, no, you sent the camera tests. These are amazing. And what I realized was, if you're sitting in an office building in New York and you put on a headset and all of a sudden you're in the middle of the Sequoias and you can look around and be in the Sequoia National Forest, that's an amazing thing. That's an amazingly powerful tool that you literally feel like you're in a different environment. And I was like, oh, it was actually that moment. I was like, this is something different. This is not 3D. This is an entirely new type of Sunday as opposed to a cherry. Well, I mean, I feel like the burden is both lifted and lowered at the same time, right? I feel like if you look at the early Oscars for cinematography, it was always for when you shot things like, Lawrence of Arabia, because you have these beautifully stunning, vistas to sort of shoot, or you shoot these old westerns and you're shooting the Grand Canyon. Yeah, if you have production design that's built around the Grand Canyon, it's going to look awesome. So I feel like we're sort of going through the same thing where it's not just seeing the Grand Canyon, you actually get to be in it. At the same time, is like, what is the narrative story that's going to take you to the Grand Canyon that's going to stand up against that set, as you were. So I think the challenges are great, and I think the challenges are great, but the opportunities to say, hey, look, we can just put you in an environment and it's going to be fun, is great. At the same time, is I think the newness of the technology is what sort of allows people just to say, hey, I'm in the forest, that's cool. But I think people get used to that very, very quickly, and then we have to figure out, okay, if we're not telling great stories, people aren't going to come and watch. I think the skill set of a DP right now is very narrowly defined, right, because of the tech and the tools that we have. I think that as we get into more VR storytelling that becomes standardized, there will be those DPs who can take that underlying knowledge and translate that language translate it into a new language. But I don't think no, like, there's no cuts right now, right? Like, because right now we did everything we did was a oneer, right? So actors would say, okay, I'm ready for my close-up. We're like, no, there's no, you just did your close-up, and you also just did your medium shot, and you just did your wide shot all at the same time. And that's sort of like, okay, that works, but that just means you have to sort of compose. You have to compose as if you're shooting in every direction at all times, because you're shooting in every direction at all times. That's a problem. That's a real problem, because either you're painting it out in post, right? So you're literally, or you have to hide it, right? So, like, we did a lot of things where we actually, my favorite story is we actually had to bury the director underneath the track, because we had a track that we were shooting on. The only way that we were in the forest, the only way he could see the actors was to be under the track, because that was the only thing that we had budgeted to paint out. So we literally dug a hole, buried our director, laid track on top of him, and that's what we shot. And so, the director's on the bottom giving his notes up through the camera, to the actors. It's one of the more absurd things I've ever done on a set. But finding your place where you can, the technology is already advanced, so there now is an ability to have video village. When we were shooting, there was no video village. We had to sort of go and watch a quick stitch, an hour later. So knowing whether you got the shot or not was next to impossible.